Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our S&D press conference. I have with me today Gianni Pittella, our group president, Silvia Costa, chair of the Culture Committee, and Linda McAvan, chair of the EP Development Committee. Gianni Pittella will give an introduction into the priorities for the week ahead. And we will then talk about the Educa initiative, which our group launches today on investment for education for children. Gianni Pittella.
Sì, grazie.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here today with Linda and Silvia and all of you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. Even though we are going through some problems in 2015, we've seen what the results were in France. The second round saw that the Socialists and the Republicans came through, and the nationalist danger was allayed. The Socialists did well. They won some large regions, important regions, and it's also an important political sign as well, alongside that of the Republicans. The Socialists made a sacrifice to protect the interests of the nation, so I'd like to thank our French Socialists, because they did allay the danger posed by Le Pen, and they've been dealing not only with the threat of terrorism and the threat of the problems connected with migration, they're also going through the period of austerity measures. And they are addressing the challenges of things that are feeding into growing nationalist sentiment. Then there was the conference on the climate. We're pleased with the results of that. This result is different to the result that came out of the Kyoto conference. Minister Fabius did an excellent job, and everyone worked towards these results. So now, at European level, we need to make sure that our policies are in line with the new ambitious targets set by COP21. Legislation and targets need to be adjusted, and these are things that we've already set at European level. Now, there isn't a contradiction between the aims to cut CO2 emissions and to tackle climate change. There's no contradiction with that between the need to consolidate our industrial bases. Industry in Europe needs to adjust its mission to the new economic strategy. It needs to be sustainable. And it also needs to improve innovation and invest more in research. Now, we do want to see growth in industry. Then Frontex, that's the next topic. Now, we do welcome the new proposal made by the Juncker Commission. For the first time, in a very practical way, there is recognition of the fact that Lesbos, Lampedusa and Hungary are European borders. They're not Greek, Italian or Hungarian borders. They're European borders, and they need to be managed that way. So we need to manage them at community level. And this is in line with the traditional position taken by the Socialist Democrats in Europe. However, the issue of borders needs to be seen as something with three parts to it. Firstly, you need to manage the external borders at community level. And then the other two things that are concerned here are formal measures to move beyond Dublin. Remember what Merkel said. Dublin is outdated. Yes, it's outdated, but we need new standards. So we're confirming these principles. We need something that is new. We need a measure which goes beyond Dublin. So we are waiting for the Commission to make these proposals to go beyond Dublin. We need an effective, efficient system for relocation. And the provisional system isn't working at the moment. So we need an effective, efficient system for relocation of migrants, because otherwise, if you're only monitoring external borders and you're not going beyond the Dublin measures, if you don't have a relocation system for refugees, there's the risk here that Lampedusa and Lesbos, that those areas there, those situations there are going to just be moved elsewhere to other kinds of concentration camps. I know it's a very strong term, but I want to use it. And then finally, I just want to say that there is a very important campaign that the S&T group has launched, the Educa campaign. Now this is looking at doubling the funding from 2% to 4% for development. So this will look at education for children in conflict areas in Africa, but not only in Africa. Everywhere where we are, we will be collecting signatures. Everywhere we go, anyone we meet, we're going to ask for a signature. So you've got this passport, which says a passport to a better future. And the aim here is for the relevant commissioner to look at our request for increased funding for education. Millions of children do not have the right to education. They're deprived of that right, and so this means that we're losing an entire generation. And we in politics aren't interested in what's going on at home alone. We want to look at problems that afflict many, many people, even if they're far away from our own homes. And now I'll give the floor to Linda McAvan, and then I'll give the floor to Silvia Costa. Thank you.
Thank you. Not much to add to what Gianni has said about the campaign for Educa. The good news is that in the budget voted last month, which we will finalise, the Commission has already proposed an increase in the budget, and we're hoping we can push that to 4% in the EU budget much earlier than when we launched our campaign earlier this year, the campaign to get it there. But tomorrow we're also going to vote a report by Enrique Guerrero Salom, another socialist colleague, in preparation for the World Humanitarian Summit, which takes place in April. And that'll be the first World Summit ever, bringing together all the different parties to look at humanitarian aid. And there we want the whole global community to increase aid to 4%. I'll just give you an example. I mean, what's the problem? The problem is that at the moment you've got two kinds of aid. You've got short-term emergency aid, food, water provision when there's a refugee crisis in a conflict. On the other hand, you have long-term development. And in the past, we've not spent long-term development aid on education because it's in a short-term funding. But nowadays, the average person in a refugee camp spends 17 years in a refugee camp. I live in Sheffield in the north of England. I met a young guy from Somalia who had spent 15 years in a refugee camp. He had missed his entire education. His whole life had gone. And this is what this is about. It's about making sure the children and the young people in the refugee camps can continue their education, that we ensure the funding is there, and so that we don't have the kind of lost generation that Gianni has spoken about, a lost generation which, if it doesn't be active, isn't educated, can end up in the hands of extremists. This is an extremely important initiative, and I'm very grateful to Gianni for spearheading this.
Grazie, prego Silvia.
Credo sia molto importante.
Thank you.
I think this whole campaign is extremely important. As Linda and Gianni have both stressed, we have already taken one step forward. The additional 26 million euros which the Commission earmarked following our resolution last month means that we have gone somewhat beyond the miserable 2% which was offered. We're talking about 3.2 billion euros of EU aid devoted to education, as well as refugee camps and, of course, the needs of those children in an emergency situation. However, by 2018, we need to at least double this funding, perhaps even more. I think we can be optimistic. As far as education and the creation of their structures is concerned, that shouldn't be viewed as a second phase of work after the initial emergency. So I think it's important that we focus our education campaign, and we have to include refugees. Noor, for example, a Syrian refugee, a teacher who's been working with a whole series of NGOs who've been investing in education. So we have to stress the need to focus on education during the emergency itself. That's an investment of fundamental importance. We're talking about children who've been subject to violence, they've been abandoned, they're often unaccompanied minors, and for these children, education is a powerful tool for inclusion. At the same time, we have to ensure that children and their families see their efforts to integrate themselves supported. And education provides a great deal of reassurance for such families. There's another issue, and we're starting to see initial signs of a desire for intercultural dialogue and interreligious dialogue. I'm delighted to note that in some countries, including my own country, our Prime Minister said €1 for security, €1 for education and culture. Solidarity and education are an essential plank of our policy, including security policy. These children who've come to our country will have seen the kind face of Europe. So obviously we have the problem of children and young people. At the same time, the resolution which goes with this campaign also calls for the extension of efforts to teenagers. There's so many of them. We've heard that there are 5.2 million children who haven't been able to attain or reach university. So we have to try to help them. The High Representative, Ms. Mogherini, has also been working on this. We've actually asked the Luxembourgish presidency to work towards opening up our universities with safe corridors so that these young people can continue their studies. That's another way in which the European Union can respond to this crisis. Also, certain open universities, distance universities, have also kindly opened up their study programs to these young Syrians. Solidarity is one of the key components of security. So is education. It's essential that we find ways of opening up this dialogue. This is very important, and we've seen to what extent these young people can be exposed to radicalization. Ms. Costa, I would like to ask you whether the series of EU summits which we've had in recent months on a practically weekly basis now, whether the European Council should be dealing not just with the migration crisis, but also with the fact that this whole process of migration in countries where the migration issue has caused so many social problems, including my own country, Italy, whether we shouldn't be thinking hard about the kind of measures Europe can take to support national governments. My second comment is to Mr. Pittella. I see that you're still very much concerned about Africa. So last year we heard about blood diamonds. This year we've got this campaign which is also of direct relevance to many African countries, caught up with direct implications as well for the Middle Eastern crisis. So after events in Paris, I'm talking about the Charlie Hebdo events, a very important declaration was adopted by all education ministers, rather than the Council, which you quite rightly referred to, So this declaration involved a solemn commitment to look into ways of rethinking our educational system so as to promote greater integration and inclusion. There are various different educational models of great interest. So I think that assimilation has seen its time. We need to move towards now to an intercultural model. However, I think it would be very useful to have a European Council meeting devoted to this. Education is essential for integration. In our own recent conference, bringing together parliamentarians interested in education for youth, we called for any spending designed to achieve this target to be taken away from the calculations on deficit. I'd like to thank you for having reminded us that the Party of European Socialists has a leitmotif in terms of this commitment. We're not just off a one-off public initiatives. Last year, we called for a major initiative for Africa. We also pushed very hard for compulsory traceability of extractive resources from those parts of Africa which are subject to violence. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of deaths have been linked to wars in these areas of mining industries. So Italy has been neglected by countries in the European Union. The time has come for us to reinstate a political, commercial and cultural partnership with Africa. Africa really should be a priority for the EU.
Yes, please, and then I think we have to finish.
Anna Vandensky from the EU Reporter. My first question is to Senora Costa. Why do you attach such an importance to education? Because, for example, the perpetrators of Boston terroristic acts were highly educated young men. They received everything from the society. They studied in the best universities. So why education is a magic tool? And my second question is to Mr. Pittella, because back to the victory of Marine Le Pen, has it had impacted to any extent the position of socialists and your strategy towards immigration? If you have for a few more moments, what is your take on Brexit? Do you think that Europe needs a profound reform to accommodate British interest and Britain staying in the European Union? Thank you.
First of all, voglio dire che
Well, I'd like to say that in the Culture Committee, we have just adopted a report that I think is very, very interesting. It's a word report. The title is Diversity and Cultural Dialogue and the Role of Education. And we're trying to look at how to teach Europe in schools. What do we mean here? Well, we're trying to look at this kind of problem seriously. We're looking at the word education. It's not only about teaching, it covers much more. It means that you need to think about models of relationship as well. So I'm just thinking about the kinds of models of education as well that need to be rethought. And I think that the public field, also schools, can't just exclude the idea of identity or faith. They need to be able to build bridges for dialogue and understanding. You need to recognise diversity. You shouldn't be rejecting. I think that's fundamental when it comes to education.
Brevemente.
Just very briefly, the victory over Le Pen and the victory in terms of the sense of democratic responsibility in France. Now, this was accompanied by a very lucid approach on the part of the socialists. The Le Pen phenomenon, like the Lega Nord in Italy and like other ultranationalist and right-wing movements in Europe, are xenophobic, and they go against what we fight for in terms of democracy in Europe and the economic policies in Europe. We're looking at growth and social cohesion. We're against any hypothesis that there would be a Brexit. We would be against anything that was suggesting a Grexit as well. And so in that way, we're against the idea of a Brexit. The UK is an important part of the EU.
If there are further questions, maybe we can take them outside. Thank you.